did you learn different things from each one of these arts?
Well, sure. I mean, my dan ranking in karate came first, and that's a matter of creating physical force and conveying it to a target while denying target to the opponent primarily. And there are various things that you do to your physiology to focus that energy, using pressure and impulse and other principles like that. Whereas judo is primarily a matter of leverage, knowing where your body is and where your center of mass is and how that person's body reacts when you push it or pull it in this way or that. Jiu-jitsu, which I have a brown belt in Shorin-ju Jiu-jitsu, is an interesting meld of those things in the sense that it was using punches and kicks to set you up to move in closer for the throws and the locks. So it was much closer to sort of an organic cycle, an organic spiral of motion. And that kind of started familiarizing me with the idea that all these different martial arts were looking at the same things from different directions. So I stopped looking at them as being different arts and started asking myself more the question, well, how does this art address these questions, and how does this art develop attributes that are then used in this situation according to this set of combative theories?
Clearly, you spent some time looking at the mental and spiritual aspects of the martial arts. How do you blend these? I mean, you talked about blending technique. How do you blend the mental and physical and spiritual aspects of it? Are they inseparable to begin with or not?
I would say that they're ultimately inseparable. A lot of people don't recognize or don't realize that they're inseparable, but the thing you have to remember is that any skill in life, whether it's a martial skill or the skill of writing or the skill of cooking or anything else, is based on your ability to maintain poise under stress. So ultimately, you have to start dealing with your fears. And especially as a martial artist, the primary fear is going to be one of injury or death. So you're forced to look into some very serious questions. Why am I here? What am I doing? What is this about? Where am I going? What am I prepared to die for? What am I prepared to kill for? I mean, that's the difference between a warrior and a martyr. Is a lot of times people mistake the warrior ethic as somebody who's prepared to die. Well, that's part of it, but he's also prepared to kill. And if you leave that out, you're missing something very important about that. It's something that has to be considered very, very soberly, because if you're conscious at all, it makes you question your connection with the value of life itself. What is life? What is it that is worth taking that step for? And I think that when you go down that road, and if you don't go down that road, you never gain the clarity to do anything other than be an athlete. So you can move fast and you can move hard. And as long as you're winning, that's fine. But you're putting a mask over your fear. You're putting a shell over your fear rather than dealing with the things that actually devil you, the things that actually are plaguing you. And I think that a person like that is most likely to fold under real stress, because they're operating out of their ego, and the ego shell cannot survive confrontation with reality.
I had to pause for a minute on that one. See, that was probably one of the most profound answers we've ever had on this show.
I had some really good teachers, dude.
And you're a good student, clearly.
I love the arts. I'd be dead if it were not for martial arts and not for my writing career and not for the people who have loved me. And I owe everything to my teachers, and basically I owe everything to my teachers. I really do.
Well, the line starts here. What is a person's favorite book or film? Let's say film. What does a person's favorite film say about them? And then, once you're done with that, I'm going to tell you what my 3 favorite films are real quickly, and you're going to tell me what those say.
Well, I would say that, let me back up just a little bit from that and say that I think you can tell something about the philosophy of a writer by the way the plot twists and turns in a given story. In other words, the way a plot turn has to do with the way the universe reacts to the actions of the protagonist. In other words, that the plot, in other words, and the structure of the story reveals the writer's view of the ethical structure of the universe. So I think that we choose fiction that says something about, relates to the way we see the world. And sometimes we like stuff that helps us to diminish our stress level. Sometimes we like stuff that increases our stress level so we reach a healthy sort of emotional tonus. But I think overall there's something in that work that appeals to our philosophical view of the way the world is, that we look at that and we think to ourselves that it helps us to get deeper in touch with our sense of the way the world operates. And it could be comedy, or it could be horror, it could be any number of different things. But that's kind of what I would think. You know, for me, for instance, the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey was a complete breakthrough for me, and what represented for many years, and possibly still to this date, my favorite movie of all time, at least partially because it suggested that the absolute truths of the world cannot be contained within words. It's difficult to even point to them in terms of images. That movie was a Zen koan in cinematic form, and the first rendition of such that I'd ever really seen, and it required two absolute geniuses, Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke, to create that. You don't do that easily. You can't do that by just trying to do that. That requires genuine vision and genuine genius, and then all they were able to say is, really, we cannot represent this. So I think that touched something that I'd always felt about the world.
Okay, here's 3 quick films for you, and you can sit back on your chair, Mr. Freud, and tell me what you think about it. The Quiet Man, Last Samurai, Dr. Strangelove.
Well, let's see. The Quiet Man, I think, touches a couple different interesting things. One of them, it has very much to do with a curious phenomenon of the way men create friendship with each other. That they will beat the hell out of each other so that they can be friends. And there's a certain pecking order that has to be established, that there's a certain amount of force that a man has to put out into the world before he's allowed to be gentle and quiet. The Last Samurai seems to me to deal with a man who had dishonored himself from the position of the warrior, okay? And that through emptying himself and then absorbing the warrior ethic of a completely different culture, he was able to find himself once again. And Dr. Strangelove, in certain ways, would deal with the warrior ethic gone completely berserk. So I think all 3 of those would deal with an aspect, all 3 of them are pointing at the same mountain, a question of what is it to be a man in the world. But they're looking at it from different positions, and perhaps the 3 of them can triangulate the space in the center, which is the name that cannot be named, that thing of what is it to be, not just what is man that thou art mindful of him, but what is it to be a man? What is it to be in the world with these particular drives and needs? And I would guess that probably relates to your lifelong interest in martial arts in that sense, trying to define that, what that means for you.
I've jotted some notes. I'll be thinking late into the night on that answer as well. You've traveled quite a bit. What's the biggest change you've seen in the world of martial arts since you started, and what's it look like today?
Well, in the 40s, it was jiu-jitsu. In the 50s, it was judo. In the 60s, it was karate. In the 70s, it was ninjutsu. In the 80s, I don't know. It started getting into the mixed martial arts. It's been mixed martial arts for a while now, and I think that's it, because there are no more major, cultural chunks to come forward in that sense. And what there is now is more the question of martial science. Bruce Lee kind of started that, the question of, well, what we're really doing is we're using the laws of physics, we're using the laws of psychology, and we're using the laws of physiology in order to defend ourselves, organize our mental and physical energies to do this. And now that we're able to take a look and see the way different people from around the world have done this, it's possible to step through the cultural divide, through the cultural smokescreen, as it were, and to take a look at them as not just sports, because that only deals, or not only, it deals primarily with the sort of Newtonian physics of what's going on. There are spiritual aspects as well, but as these disciplines start getting integrated into special forces training and things like that, I remember the one smart thing I ever heard Steven Seagal say had to do with the fact that if you wanted to find a ninja today, go talk to special forces guys. Go talk to guys who are, that's what the modern version